Kia ora koutou. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And as Helen has said in her introduction, what I'd like to talk about today is a framework or a model that we use to undertake systematic assessments of animal welfare states. And very exciting this morning that Minister O'Connor has actually referred specifically to this framework. So we're in a good state to go ahead and have a chat about it. This will be quite a brief sort of presentation about the model and how it relates to supporting good lives for animals. And if you have questions or would like to know more detail about the model, I'd be really happy to talk about that afterwards, either in this forum or if you'd like to contact me directly. So what I would like to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so is 5 key points. So firstly, I would like to make the point that this model, the 5 domains model, really reflects the understanding that many of us now have about what animal welfare is. And that's the notion that animal welfare is really a reflection of the animal's experience of itself and its own life and its own world. And so you'll see as we talk about the model that the structure of the model represents that understanding of animal welfare. The next thing I want to briefly touch on is something that Nat has also said, which is that good welfare requires animals to have positive experiences, according to our kind of modern understanding of what welfare and good welfare is. And so I want to talk briefly about how we can use the model to integrate some of the negative and positive experiences that animals might be having at a particular point in time in order to understand their overall welfare state. I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the difference between opportunities for positive experiences and actual welfare enhancement. And what I'll talk about there is utilized opportunities. And then finally, I want to make the point that the model is a way of assessing animals' welfare states, but it doesn't tell us the answers to questions like, is this a good life? Is this an acceptable life? Is this enough positive experience? So the model provides information to feed into ethical discussions about those sorts of issues. So I want to start off by just giving you a brief sort of characterization of animal welfare as many of us understand it today. And this really comes back to this idea that animal welfare is now considered to be a state within the animal itself. It is the animal's personal and direct experience of itself living the life that it is living. And that overall experience of itself and its life arises because of the integration of all the different mental experiences, or what we might call affective states that the animal is having at a particular point in time. And when we talk about affective states or mental experiences, really what we're talking about is experiences that have some significance to the animal. They matter, they mean something to the animal. And so they have either a negative or an unpleasant quality, or they have a positive or pleasant quality to them. And these affective experiences arise because of sensory information that the animal interprets through its central nervous system about its physical state, so its physiological or internal state, but also sensory information about what's going on around it, so its perceptions of the environment. And we consider that at any particular point in time, an animal's welfare state can be somewhere on a continuum. So it can range from very poor at one end of the continuum all the way up to very good at the other end of the continuum. And I'm going to come back and refer to that continuum again in a moment. So for anybody who hasn't seen this model, hasn't been exposed to it, this is a very generic sort of version of the model, just so that we can explore its structure. And the key point that I want you to take away from this is that the structure of the model reflects the understanding or the characterization of animal welfare that I've just described. So what you see is that we have 5 domains, so it's a good name for the model. And I'm going to start on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side, we have the 4 domains that we call the physical or functional domains. And these are kind of organized in a way that's fairly intuitive to us. And what we're doing here is we're sort of exploring different dimensions or aspects of the animal's life. So we have domain 1, which is about the animal's nutritional or hydration status. We have domain 2, which is information about the animal's physical and sensory environment. And so there we're thinking about things like the thermal environment, the substrate on which the animal is living. We might be thinking about things like air quality, noise, that sort of thing. Domain 3 is about the animal's health and functional status. So we might be interested, for example, in the absence or presence of disease or injury. And domain 4 is about the animal's behavioral interactions. And so here we're interested in its interactions with parts of the environment. So we might be interested in exploration or foraging, for example, as behaviors. But we're also really importantly interested in the animal's social interactions. So interactions with other animals of its own species, of animals of other species, and really importantly, interactions with us as humans. So the way that I think about the model is that those 4 physical functional domains are the places that we collate or organize evidence. And that evidence is the things that we can observe and the things that we can measure. So anything that you can observe or measure, you need to put in the physical functional domains as your body of evidence. And we then use that body of evidence to make very careful and scientifically supported inferences or interpretations in terms of what the animal's likely mental experience will be. So anything that's about the animal's experiences, its mental state, its feelings, its affects goes into domain 5, and that's the affective experience or mental experience domain. So a really easy way to remember is that anything you can observe or measure goes into the physical functional domains. Anything that you can't observe or measure because it's subjective, it's internal, and it's personal to the animal itself, and so not available for our scientific scrutiny directly, that goes in domain 5. And it's the stuff in domain 5 that we think is most directly related to the animal's welfare status. So this is kind of how the model reflects that understanding that welfare is what the animal itself experiences, and that's what's in domain 5. So this next point, I guess, is really fairly obvious, and it's one that Nat made, and you will hear many others in this conference make as well. And this is basically the notion that we don't regard animals as being able to have a good state of welfare or an acceptable state of welfare unless they're having some positive experiences. So I want to come back to that idea of the continuum. So we said the animal's welfare state can range on one end of the continuum from very bad all the way through at the other end of the continuum to very good. And the point is that if we are able to prevent or to alleviate or mitigate the occurrence of negative experiences for animals, that's fantastic, but it can only ever take us to about the halfway point on our continuum. So by avoiding or mitigating negative experiences, we can only ever hope to, best case scenario, get our animals to a neutral welfare state. If we want to take them further along the continuum to that positive end, we have to provide opportunities or facilitate animals having positive experiences as well. And so Nat gave a nice characterization of what positive welfare or good welfare might be. And I think mine is pretty much the same, just slightly differently worded, which is that we might consider animals to be having good welfare or be in a positive welfare state when they have only a few negative experiences. Those experiences are pretty minor, so they don't have a great deal of significance to the animal, and that they are transient. They don't last for very long. It's unrealistic to think that animals won't have any negative or unpleasant experiences, because we all do. Into every life, a little rain must fall. But we want to make sure that they are minimized. But at the same time, animals must also have frequent and significant or meaningful positive experiences in order to have a good life. So I want to show you a really cool figure, and this has come from the Zoo and Aquarium Association of Australasia, and I just think they've really captured that exact idea so nicely in this figure. So if you just start by looking at the y-axis, underneath the line, they've represented negative or unpleasant experiences of different kinds. And above the line, they've represented positive experiences. And this is showing sort of a period of time along the x-axis, a period of time in an animal's life, and a fluctuation of different experiences. And so this is their characterization of an animal that is in a positive state overall, that's having, generally a good or acceptable time over this period. And what it shows is exactly what I just said. So we have just a few a few negative experiences. They're relatively minor, so the curve doesn't dip down very far below the line there. And you can see that they don't last for very long. On the other hand, we have a lot of positive experiences, so they're frequent. Some of them are quite meaningful. They have quite a high variation from the horizontal there, and they tend to be a bit more long-lasting. And we've got a variety of different positive experiences, which others in the conference will explore a bit more. So I really love this. I think this is such a great way to demonstrate to people what we mean by having a positive state or a good life over that period of time. So what it means for us as people interested in scientific assessment of animal welfare is that whatever framework or model or approach we're using to understand an animal's welfare state, it should allow us to evaluate both the occurrence or the potential for negative experiences and also the potential or the occurrence of positive experiences as well. And lo and behold, the 5 domains really does that. It allows us to do both. And in fact, the structure, if you look at this as a slightly more embellished version of the generic structure, you will see that the structure of the model really encourages us to look for evidence and to interpret that evidence in terms of both the possibility of negative experiences and the possibility of positive experiences. So just very briefly, what we're looking for, so you can see that in each of the 4 physical functional domains and also then correspondingly in domain 5 about mental experiences, we have some red writing and we have some green writing. And this is just our way of representing that we need to look for evidence of conditions that might represent restrictions on what the animal can or wants to do, or conditions that are problematic for the animal, or that are inescapable for the animal, or that represent some other problem or limitation. And so for the red ones, we want to look for those sorts of restrictions or impositions, and we want to interpret them carefully using the scientific evidence available in terms of the specific negative experiences they might represent. And we do the same for positive experiences. So we're looking for opportunities for animals to be able to do the things they're highly motivated to do. And we're looking for conditions that are likely to lead to positive experiences. And so we can do that in each of the 4 physical functional domains and then make our interpretation in terms of the positive and negative experiences that the animal is likely to have. And remember, that information goes in domain 5. So the next thing we need to think about really is, remember, at any one time, animals, including you and I, are having both some negative and positive experiences. And the challenge then is, how do we integrate that information to sort of come up with an overarching understanding of what it's like to be that animal at that point in time? There are lots of different ways to do that, and I'm just going to show you one that is a suggested way that we can integrate those different pieces of information. So I'm going to show you a figure in a moment, which shows what's called welfare compromise grade. And that is sort of taking all of the different negative mental experiences in domain 5 and coming up with an overall assessment of how significant those negative experiences are. And you'll also see in a moment that these assessments, these grades, are only ever qualitative. We never make any attempt to make them numerical or precise or suggest that we have the ability to apply numbers or really specific quantitative sort of grades to those kinds of compromises and enhancements, because that's a bit artificial and we can't really do that. We don't have enough information. So you'll see welfare compromise, which is sort of the sum total of all the negative experiences and their significance for the animal. And then the same for positive experiences, and we call that the welfare enhancement grade. So if you have a look at this, remember, this is just one way to do it. On the left-hand side here, we have a range of grades that represent the severity and the intensity and the importance of negative experiences for the animal. So we could have A, which is none, ranging all the way through to E, which is very severe. And then on the top there, we have the welfare enhancement grade. And you'll see in this case that we use a different grading system. So instead of using A to E, we've got 0 for no positive experience all the way through to very positive experiences of a triple plus. So if we have a look at a situation, for example, where an animal has no real welfare compromise, so there aren't really any of those negative experiences, you remember we made the point that if we don't also provide opportunities for positive experiences, then we will get an A0 situation. So that's where we would be sitting at about neutral. If the animal has no sort of meaningful welfare compromise or problems, then it's possible to get all the way up to a really positive state and have A triple plus. But what I want you to notice about this diagram is that there are some categories that don't have any numbers in them, or don't have any grades in them. And the reason is that we think that those are probably very unlikely, if not impossible, for animals to achieve. And so that's what I've shown in the red box here. And essentially what this is saying is that if an animal has from sort of moderate to very severe welfare compromise for whatever reason, then it's highly unlikely that even if we provide opportunities, or if opportunities are there for an animal to have positive experiences, it's very unlikely that they will be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So we would regard that it's probably not possible for an animal to be very severely welfare compromised and also be having really any positive experiences at all. The pictures here are just one example of when that might happen. So if we have an animal that has a severe physical debility, then it's very unlikely, even if we have provided opportunities for positive experiences, that animal will be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And that really leads me on to my next point, which is essentially that. And this is a point, and this has come up through some work that we've been doing recently, operationalizing this model to try and understand animals' welfare in different situations. And it's really thrown up some real challenges. And so the point here is when we go about trying to evaluate positive experiences that animals might have, we need to be very clear about the differences between opportunities and enhancements. And the other way to think about enhancement is utilized opportunity. So I just want to take a moment to talk through this. In terms of opportunities, that's really what we are providing. It's what we are facilitating, the things that we provide in the environment. And when we go about evaluating opportunities, really what we're doing is we're using resource-based indicators. What are the things that are there that could provide an opportunity for the animal to have a positive or rewarding experience? And the way that we kind of think about this is that opportunities represent the risk of having a positive experience. Now, that sounds kind of silly. Another way to think about it that's more intuitive is that they represent the likelihood that an animal will have a positive experience. That's really great. So here's my bag of Lego that sits on my living room floor, and this represents an opportunity for my very strange cat, Sirius, to have a positive experience. But it does not give me a direct evidence that he's having a positive experience. Ideally, what I want to do is look for evidence in my domains 1 to 4 of enhancement. And in other words, I need to find evidence of utilized opportunity. And this is what the animal does with what we provide. When we're looking for direct evidence of enhancement, what we're using is animal-based indicators. And most of the time, what that means is we're looking for animal behaviors. And so by doing this, we are providing the most direct evidence possible that the animal is utilizing that opportunity and that a positive experience has actually genuinely occurred. So when I see Sirius sitting in his wonderful, comfortable nest of Lego, I know that he's having a happy time. So just to make my final point, and this is really the point that the model is a tool and it doesn't do the work for us. It does not tell us that an animal is having a good life. It does not tell us that the animal is having enough positive experience for us to be satisfied with what we've provided for the animal. And so what it really does, or what the application of the model and the outputs do, is allows us to do a number of things that inform those subsequent discussions. So it allows us to identify and understand the existing impacts or compromises, the negative things that are maybe happening, and it also allows us to understand any enhancements. It allows us to put those things in an order and come up with a relative ranking. So if we have different alternatives or options for a particular procedure or way of doing things with animals, it allows us to pick the one that has the least negative and the most positive. And really importantly, it allows us to evaluate the effects of any interventions that we might put in place. So if we provide a resource, an opportunity, does the animal take that on? And how does that shift the balance of its overall welfare state? But as I said, the model does not tell us how much positive is enough positive for an acceptable or a good life. And this is going to become a real challenge that we as a community are going to have to address going forward. And particularly when we think about the ways that we might want to incorporate rules in our codes of welfare or in other sort of guiding documents about ensuring that animals have positive experiences. So moving past just the alleviation or the mitigation or the avoidance of negatives, and now starting to sort of put in our regulatory structure that animals also have to have positives, the question arises about how much is enough. in order to comply with the law or with those regulations. So the model will be really useful for these discussions going forward, but certainly it's really important to understand that it won't tell us the answers to those questions. Very quick summary. So the points that I've made today are that the 5 domains model really reflects our understanding of welfare, which is that it's based on animals' experiences. As we all probably would agree, good welfare requires that animals have positive experiences, but really that animals can't have positive experiences unless they're mostly free of negatives. It's not appropriate to consider that we're all going to be free of negatives all the time, but most of the time we want to. We really want to, whenever we can, evaluate enhancements or utilize opportunities, not just what we provide. And the outputs from the application of this model will be useful going forward to inform our ethical discussions about how we manage and interact with animals in New Zealand. Thanks very much.
That's great, Ngaio. Thanks very much. Very, very interesting talk indeed. You used the word meaningful, and that's a word I really like, and it resonates a lot. I think, there's conversations going on in the human field around well-being from a psychological perspective that we shouldn't be, I shouldn't use the word shouldn't. We ought not be considering that the end goal is around being happy, because happy is just one of those transitory things that come and go. And a psychologist, Russ Harris, uses the term rich, full, and meaningful around, how we might like to capture what a meaningful life looks like. I think it's a really nice way to think about it. And I don't mean rich from a monetary sense. I mean rich from all of those other things that we find individually to be to provide that richness in our life. So yeah, there's some challenges there. I'm kind of interested to understand whether you think those types of those are very subjective experiences from an individual animal's perspective. The idea of rich, full, and meaningful was a much more useful way of measuring somehow someone else's life experience who doesn't speak the same language as us. So I understand there's some massive challenges in doing that. But is that something that kind of resonates with what you've just spoken about, and how, kind of what we should be steering towards long term?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Helen. And I often give this example. I think one of the challenges with assessing positive experiences in animals is the individual variability. And I always give the example, it's not a great one to give to you, but one of the things I really enjoy in my life is to go for a run. And, that gives me a great deal of pleasure. And you talk to other people and they say, that's the worst thing I could possibly imagine. Please don't make me do that. So, when we look at negatives, a lot of the negatives we are assessing are survival critical. And so, they're very well conserved across species, across taxa, and within species as well, because if you don't attend to them, you will die. And positives are different, because for many of them, there isn't that survival kind of necessity, I guess. And so that allows for a flowering of a lot more variability among individuals within a species. And it makes it a lot more challenging. And I think that also reminds us about why providing opportunities, like enrichment items, does not give us a good direct indication that every animal in a group, for example, is having a good time. It simply tells us that the likelihood that the animals in that group might have a good time is higher. But unless we see an individual interacting in a meaningful way with that enrichment item, we can't be confident that that individual's having a positive experience.
It's one of those situations where the more you know, the harder it gets, right? And the more complex it is to distill down. The circle of what I didn't know is just suddenly much, much bigger.
Yeah.
So leading on from that, and I think you've probably answered it, but there's a question that's come up, which is, about the challenges of assigning those positive welfare grades, so plus, or plus. And based on what you've just said, of course, that then becomes incredibly difficult, right? Because each one of those would actually ideally be done from every individual animal's perspective about what they want to have a rich, full, and meaningful life. So, do you have a brief comment around how that?
I mean, 2 points, I guess. The first one is that we're really in our infancy in terms of understanding and having a battery of indicators that we can use to recognize positive welfare, positive experiences. There's a lot of work to be done and some very clever people working on it. I guess the second point is that this is a an incremental improvement kind of situation. And so if we can make some general moves in the right direction, i.e. we provide opportunities that the science has shown that many animals of that species and age range and in that environment do utilize and get pleasure from, or their behavior suggests they're getting pleasure from, then absolutely we should do that. And we're sort of working our way towards better and better approaches as we go along, but we shouldn't not do those things because we're not sure. We should certainly say, hey, lots of piglets seem to enjoy it when you put a tire with peanut butter in the enclosure. So let's go ahead and do that because it's not going to cause any harm. And it certainly provides evidence that some of the individuals are enjoying it. Why would we not?
Mm. Yeah. Coming back to your example before we move on, that's a little bit like making all of the kids at school go for a run, though. There is a small subset of those kids who really don't agree with you, Ngaio.
I own 2 of those, apparently. So apparently enjoying running is not a genetic trait. It's not heritable because my children both absolutely hate it.
They may come to it when they come to their senses later in their life, is what I also found. Okay, so thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and insights.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. And for the donation to Animals Asia. I just think it's the most wonderful idea and I'm hugely grateful. Thank you. It's just a really neat thing to do.
Yeah, thanks, Ngaio.